Did you know that in 1860, Egypt's GDP per capita was higher than Italy's? This is just one surprising fact in the complex story of African economies. Today, we're diving deep into over 160 years of economic booms, busts, and everything in between, visualized. Forget simple narratives. We're using data to uncover the hidden truths behind Africa's economic journey. Our dataset spans from 1860 to 2025, covering banking, debt, financial, inflation, and systemic crises across 13 key nations: Algeria, Angola, Central African Republic, Côte d'Ivoire, Egypt, Kenya, Mauritius, Morocco, Nigeria, South Africa, Tunisia, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. This journey begins long before colonial borders were drawn. In 1860, Egypt's economy, measured in 1990 international dollars, stood at 682 per capita. This figure challenges the common perception of a uniformly poor pre-colonial Africa. Other regions thrived through trade networks, agriculture, and skilled craftsmanship. But the scramble for Africa changed everything. From the late 19th century onwards, European powers carved up the continent, implementing economic policies designed to benefit themselves. The Congo Free State, under King Leopold II of Belgium, serves as a stark example. Between 1885 and 1908, the brutal extraction of rubber and ivory generated an estimated $1.1 billion in today's money. This wealth came at a horrific cost, an estimated 10 million Congolese lives. The legacy of colonial extraction continues to cast a long shadow. The institutions established during this era often favored foreign interests and suppressed local economic development. Following independence in the 1960s, many African nations faced a new set of economic challenges. From the 1970s to the 2010s, systemic crises became a recurring theme. Egypt experienced economic turmoil in the 1980s, while South Africa faced a major debt crisis in 1985. On average, the 13 countries in our dataset experienced 1.2 systemic crises per decade after 1860. Nationalization policies, often intended to promote local control, sometimes backfired. In Nigeria, a 1972 decree nationalizing banks contributed to a wave of banking crises in the 1980s and 90s. The oil shock of 1973 triggered a debt crisis across the continent. Zambia, heavily reliant on copper exports, saw its economy plummet when copper prices crashed in 1975, leading to a default in 1985 and a 30% GDP decline over the next 15 years. Hyperinflation has plagued several African nations, eroding savings and destabilizing economies. Angola experienced average annual inflation of 2,000% between 1991 and 2003, peaking at a staggering 3,700% in 1994. Zimbabwe's hyperinflation crisis, which reached its zenith in November 2008, saw monthly inflation hit an astronomical 79.6 billion%. This crisis, fueled by land reforms that seized thousands of white-owned farms, resulted in a 50% contraction of Zimbabwe's GDP. Some countries, however, have defied the odds and achieved sustained economic growth. Mauritius, after gaining independence in 1968, avoided major crises by focusing on export-oriented manufacturing, particularly in the textile sector. This strategy led to an impressive 14% average annual growth rate in textiles between 1970 and 1990. South Africa, on the other hand, faced economic headwinds during the apartheid era. International sanctions, imposed in 1985, froze $20 billion in assets, slowing growth to an average of 1.5% between 1980 and 1994. Economic crises have had a significant impact on long-term growth. On average, affected countries experienced a 2.5% reduction in GDP per capita growth annually. Institutional quality plays a crucial role in economic performance, explaining 40% of the growth variance between African countries from 1960 to 2020. Today, African economies face a complex set of challenges, from debt burdens to commodity price volatility. Despite these challenges, the continent shows resilience and potential for growth. The IMF projects sub-Saharan Africa to grow at 3.8% in 2025. And 4.4% on average between 2026 and 2027. The launch of the African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, in 2021, ratified by 47 countries, holds the promise of boosting intra-African trade and adding an estimated $450 billion to the continent's GDP by 2035. Debt service remains a major drain on resources, with African countries facing $70 billion in annual payments, representing 20% of their budgets. Zambia defaulted on its debt in 2020, becoming the first African country to do so during the COVID-19 pandemic. A $6.3 billion restructuring deal was reached with the IMF in 2024. The mining and energy sectors continue to play a vital role in many African economies. In South Africa, frequent power outages, known as load shedding, cost the country an estimated 5% of its GDP in 2023. The Democratic Republic of Congo, which holds 70% of the world's cobalt reserves, generated $2.5 billion in revenue from cobalt exports in 2023, but a significant portion is lost due to smuggling. Job creation remains a major challenge. While 10 million young Africans enter the workforce each year, formal job creation only grows at 2% annually, lagging behind the 3% growth in the labor force. Kenya's tech hubs, like iHub, have created 200,000 jobs, but the informal sector continues to dominate employment. Data from the Kiel Institute's Africa Monitor highlights the importance of institutional quality. Countries with strong institutions, such as Rwanda, which experienced 7.1% growth in 2023, outperformed those with weak institutions, such as South Sudan, which saw its economy contract by 4.3%. Some aspects of African economic history are often overlooked or deliberately suppressed. For example, the atrocities committed in the Congo Free State were largely concealed by the Belgian authorities. The narrative of Africa as perpetually poor is challenged by historical data showing that Egypt's GDP in 1860 rivaled that of some European nations. Zimbabwe's land reform program, intended to address historical injustices, resulted in a 70% decline in agricultural output and widespread famine. While defended as anti-colonial, the reforms were criticized for benefiting political elites. The structural adjustment programs imposed by the IMF and World Bank in the 1980s and 90s, while aimed at promoting economic growth, often led to job losses and social unrest. Critics argue that these programs prioritized market liberalization over social welfare. Pre-1960 GDP estimates are often based on proxies, and colonial records may understate the impact of the slave trade, which resulted in the forced removal of an estimated 12.5 million Africans and a loss of wealth estimated at $100 trillion in today's value. The resource curse, where resource-rich countries experience slower economic growth, has plagued many African nations. In Angola and Nigeria, oil booms led to a decline in non-oil GDP, a phenomenon known as Dutch disease. Elite capture and corruption have further exacerbated the problem, as exemplified by Nigeria's $20 billion fuel subsidy scam. As Africa moves forward, understanding its economic past is crucial for building a more prosperous future. By learning from past mistakes and embracing sound economic policies, African nations can unlock their full potential and create a brighter future for their citizens.